if you have ever convinced someone to go to a restaurant that you really like that they've never been to, you're good at sales. And they went, you're good at sales. You're selling all the time. Like money.
Yeah, but they are good at sales. Like they just sold you on the fact that they're bad at sales. Like that in itself is a sale. And welcome back to the Money, the Mindset, and the Mentoring podcast. And we here today are with Adina Kroll. And we are going to have a whole bunch of fun today talking about sales, talking about carnage, talking about video games, talking about everything fun. So we've just had such a great conversation leading into this. And I think we had a few conversations because we've been, I think, scheduling we're on a baker's dozen of trying to make this happen because of my bad scheduling for myself. But thank you so much for being so patient. And you are an amazing rock star.
Right back at you.
So one of the things that I was like, I know we're going to have a great conversation is when I went to your website and at adinakroll.com and like all the little nuggets that were on there, I was like, man, this is so much fun. So if you ever want to search a website and find some little funny things, just go check out adinakroll.com and it's got all these little buttons you got one nugget. You said there's one spot that only one person has found, the little Easter egg that's there.
I'm not going to tell you what it is because
no, you can't tell. Somebody's got to find it and then like put it in the chat or something afterwards on YouTube or whatever. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's pretty cool. So welcome to the show. Yeah, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
So tell me a little bit about why people care about what you're talking about, other than the fact that you're fun, but why would people care about you? Like what brings you the power in sales? Why should people listen to you?
I'd rephrase that question slightly. It's not so much that they should listen to me, it's probably that they'd like to, because when and I'm going to give a bit of context, I used to work in IT sales. So I had, for 7 or 8 years, I had a lot of sales trainings in there because we have big quotas. And one of the many things that we were taught is like, no means yes. Or, I mean, that's problematic in...
Why do you think no means yes doesn't work?
Like, yes, Henry. Like, think about what you've just said.
That's right. I'm going to go teach my son. No means yes. And that doesn't... Yeah,
but that's legit what we were taught. It's just like, the sales starts with the no. And I'm like, oh, God, will you just like, no. And there's method to my madness. And basically, like, I've had all of these sales trainings where we were told to dial for dollars, go on the spreadsheets, make sure that we handle objections. And it just didn't feel right. And when I worked in sales, we had to make like 40 calls, our KPIs, our key performance indicators, 40 calls a day and 2 hours of talk time. I did like 5 calls a day and I always overachieved except for 2 quarters, and that wasn't my fault. And my bosses hated it. And so I just basically called my old German number or called my nan just to sort of like get the KPIs because I was responsible for the German market. They're not going, like, they're recorded calls, but they're not going to listen to me talk to people in the German language because they're all English. And I knew that. So I was just calling,
shooting the breeze with your friends.
Well, yeah, because like, what else was I going to do? Like, I finished my job 2-3 hours in the workday, but I wasn't allowed to leave. And so I was just like, so when I spoke to my boss, I'm like, can I, like, I've done my work for the day. She's just like, well, no, you can't leave because everyone else isn't done. And I'm like, why should that be my problem? And she's just like, and everyone else, yeah, well, that's not how we do things here. And so to answer your question, why should anyone listen to me? No one should. But if that shit pisses you off, if you like being efficient and you don't like wasting your time, I'm here for you.
I think a lot of the world operates in the way of time spent, not results made. And I think back to high school when I was in high school, and when I actually started doing well in school was when I actually found teachers that would recognize just the way that I acted. And I didn't want to be in class because it moved so incredibly slow. And so my teacher would say, look, dude, you don't have to come to class. As long as you get above 90%, you don't have to be here. But the second you get below 90%, then you have to come to class. And so I'd come to class and I'd come for a little bit and then I'd leave because I'd only have to listen to 15 minutes. I don't have to listen to all the questions that people ask that doesn't really provide value to me.
Yeah.
And I'd still get 90%. And it was perfect. We would work extremely well. And rather than sitting there and just spending time.
Yeah.
And because I don't think time in it matters, I think the results of the time that you use matter. And if I'm better at the using time than somebody else, because maybe I look at principles, I don't look at mechanics, and those principles allow me to operate at a different pace, then it's great. I mean, there's other things that I do, believe me, that I will be time in it because I'm not good at it. I don't even think the amount of time, like art, for example, like no matter how much time I spend in it, it's just never going to turn out well. So I'm with you on that.
Yeah. So that's the thing, is like we've all learned that effort equals results and that we have to like pursue productivity. And that's just, I mean, that's outdated because that's factory thinking.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. The 8-hour work week. But yeah, so.
But when you say that, when you think about schools, you know, the buzzer rings, they have to go in. The buzzer rings, they go to the next class.
It's based on factory work.
It's a factory. They're learning how to work in a factory. And that's just not the way the world works anymore. I mean, there is still factory jobs, and I'm not saying that factory jobs are not a noble task. What I'm saying is that there is a lot of other options as well. And especially if you're pursuing a higher learning engagement, you shouldn't be attuned to a factory working lifestyle because it just doesn't exist in a higher working environment.
Yeah. That, and I mean, surely, and it might be ruffling some feathers ultimately, but you know, the general consensus is, oh, but who's going to take our jobs away? But I'm like, but look at how much freedom we could have if we could let machines take over the work that we don't want to do, accounting, factory work. We could all be free to do things that are fun, that are enjoyable.
Well, I think it's also identifying with the outcome rather than the labor. And I think if you identify with the outcome and you say, for example, AI is going to come in and take away all the jobs, it's, well, no, AI is going to take away the repetitive element of the job. And now it's your responsibility to skill up to allow that person to take that job, and that person, that AI. Because, I mean, when you're in a situation where you're hiring people, they're taking away your job. Don't you want that? When you hire somebody, they're taking away your job. This is like hiring somebody. So when AI comes in, you're just hiring a piece of technology to take away work so you can work on bigger and better things.
Well, you literally just summarized exactly what I'm trying to talk about so long. It's all about perspective, right? Like AI is a tool, money is a tool, everything's a fucking tool.
Yeah.
So it just depends on the user. Like the tool isn't bad or good. It's just how you see
absolutely. Well, I mean, I was, you know, in London, they have that dungeon or whatever.
Oh yeah.
Like they actually have bad tools there. So, I mean, there actually are bad tools, but most tools like money, you know, most tools like even weaponry could be considered as a good tool because we use as defense. But I mean, in the dungeon in the south of London or whatever, like, or center of London, wherever it is.
I mean, some groups of people might consider that good.
Some people might say, well, actually.
I'm like, it's perspective.
That's right. That's right. As long as there's a safe word. And
oh, good Lord.
So, yeah, I agree with that. I think people need to realize that if they can focus on the outcome, not on the labor. I think in sales, actually, that's a really good technique when you're talking with people is don't focus on the labor, focus on the baby. And that helps people identify because when you're getting them, say you're selling them a piece of technology, if you say, well, and you got to click these 45 buttons and then you've got to, you know, download this spreadsheet and do that. And then oh God, that sounds like a lot of work. But if you're like, you're doing that because you want to do this, right? It's like telling somebody to go to the gym. And I know, like even last night when I was at the gym, I was coaching last night. I coached Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and it was so funny because I just burned everybody out. I mean, it was hot, it was like humid, and I just had them hitting hard workout over and over and over again. And we didn't even close off the class. Like people just sort of started just like disappearing off the sides of the mat, just kind of getting away. And I kind of let it happen a little bit because I don't know. I didn't really feel like, being too heavy-handed on some people. But except for the people who are competing, those people had to be, really hitting it hard. But it's funny because people will look at the things that they do that's hard and focus on that. But it's like, no, if you just focus on the outcome, those things that do that hard is just going to be that much easier.
It is. And to bring it back to sales as well, like ultimately, sales is selling to friends after all, right? Anyone who comes to me and says, like, oh, Adina, I'm bad at sales. And I'm like, you're not bad at sales. If you have ever convinced someone to go to a restaurant that you really like that they've never been to, you're good at sales. And they went, you're good at sales. You're selling all the time. Like money.
Yeah, they are good at sales. Like they just sold you on the fact that they're bad at sales. Like that in itself is a sale.
Exactly. That's what I mean.
They're just more committed to being not good at sales than they are being good at sales. So you're only good at selling what you're committed to.
Well, yeah, exactly. That's exactly my point. The idea of just like, you're always selling anyway. It's just right now you're identifying with the money. Remove that. Identify with the relationship. Well, not even identify, but focus on the relationship, because that's what you can't make anyone buy. But like, for lack of a better saying, like that's how people buy. That's how you can make people buy, if you focus on the relationship.
Yep. Well, I think a lot of times people look at sales as you're convincing somebody to do something that they generally don't want to do, but now they're going to do it, and then you're going to make mad cash on a commission in doing it. And that's just not sales and what I believe in an ethical sales moment is. I think if you're helping somebody make a decision, that's a hard decision for them to make, but you're helping them go through that uncomfortable moment of change, because change is difficult for a lot of people. Correct. And so if you help them go through that uncomfortable moment, and yes, there's a commission at the end. Now that commission could be money because you're selling something. That commission could be, a feeling of accomplishment because like when I coach Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and I'm convincing somebody to do one more burpee, that's a sell job, right?
Burpees.
Burpees are for bastards. And
Exactly.
yeah, they're just burpees are the worst, but they're the best. But the thing is when you're convincing somebody to do that at that moment, is you're convincing for the better. So you're actually just helping them commit. So I'd rather say it's helping them commit to a direction rather than convincing, because convincing means you're changing their opinion. And I think most in sales, you're never really changing somebody's opinion. You're just helping them solidify something that they already knew.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of power in that when you start seeing that. So yeah. To go back to your original question, why should they? Again, exactly that. Because that's not what is traditionally taught in traditional sales. I think you can probably remember that as well, or probably know this. It's not what's taught.
Yeah, I mean your ABCs of sales, always be closing and that kind of crap. It just doesn't work, I mean, but I think then the pendulum swings too far the other way, where you get people who think they're good at sales, they get into sales and they don't ever close anything. And it's, well, you could be a tourist guide where you can take it through all your products and here's all my features, here's all my benefits, and skirt the issue that eventually somebody has to make a decision. And if somebody doesn't make a decision to purchase your stuff, you're not good at sales and you shouldn't be in sales. So you always have to close. And I'm not saying you always have to close everyone. You always have to close someone, or else you're not selling something. And I think that's a very important thing that has to happen.
It's always about balance, ultimately, isn't it? It's never just one or the other. It's always like you have to like almost tread in the middle of it.
Yeah, well, you have to be purposeful. Like to me, when I show up for work and my job is to sell, I need to wake up in the morning and know what am I supposed to do today, and what sales am I going to. If I have a long sales cycle, what my sales cycles do I need to advance? What sales cycles do I need to abandon? And what sales cycles do I need to start? And what sales cycles do I need to close? And if I understand that, then I'm going to have a very good day in sales. If I don't understand that, I don't have a mission. And again, the mission is to hit the sales target. Like you have to have a sales target. And you have to, if you're running a business, you have to equate what you're doing to the numbers of what you have to hit. Now, what you were doing, which is like, you've got to have this many hours of calls and this many, well, sometimes that's a burpee thing because it's certain people will just not pick up the phone. But when somebody like yourself is becoming a little bit more accomplished, I think the idea of getting out of the numbers and getting more tied to the results, I think is just so much better.
Just also it depends on personal preference. Ultimately, some people love quantity, right? So I would also argue that personal preference definitely plays into the part. Let's not bully or make people wrong for wanting to do. Like, there are legit people who like dialing for dollars, and I'm like, you go be your bad self. Like, I am not here to judge that. But then there are people like me who actually just prefer to have really good relationships, go into the higher end market, and then actually give a white glove service. And that is also okay, right? It's about not making people wrong. And I'm like, whatever works for you, ultimately.
Absolutely. I mean, I also look in the way that my favorite word to replace or is with a more abundant word, which is and. So you could do both. Like, you could make a lot of calls and build deep relationships. So it doesn't necessarily have to be that you're not making deep relationships, because you can be making a lot of calls to 10 people and just calling them a lot, like maybe more than 10, because that would be that's stalkerish, right? Like, for example, if you send somebody 5 emails from 5 different accounts to the same person for, say, booking
again,
a podcast,
problematic
for
behavior.
Yeah.
Maybe we should discuss that.
Yeah. That's right. I only got 3 restraining orders this week. It's a good week. Yeah.
Oh, great. I'm so proud of you.
Thanks. Yeah.
How did we get here?
Well, we got here because I know we talked about how sales is very much like relationships. We could say sales is very much like sex, right? And it's consensual activity.
Absolutely.
Makes the
I
best.
was being rhetorical.
Yeah, that's right. How did we get here? You're like, because I said it, bitches, right? Like, but it's true. Like, if you're generally good at sales, you're generally good at creating relationships with people, and generally it means that you're going to communicate better with, usually, at getting the outcomes that you're looking for. And I think if you're using that sort of brute force approach, I don't know. I think it doesn't work anymore. I don't think that idea.
The only reason I think it ever quote unquote worked is because it was a closed market and there was no internet. So you were kind of forced in a town, like, if you wanted a lawyer, if you wanted a butcher, if you wanted something that was new and there was only one option, well, tough, right? But now we have the internet. Now people have options. And so it's about personal preference.
Well, I think that also changed the way that people buy too.
Exactly.
I think we have more of an educated buyer now than what we did in the past. At least I think that. And then I start to look at how we still get bamboozled. I mean, I look back and, when certain products were sold, like an example would be asbestos, right? Like, this amazing asbestos tile that does, and people are like, oh, asbestos is awesome. And then this amazing new product that would make you really super healthy if you just would smoke cigarettes every day, right?
I mean, they put lead in bloody cosmetics back in the day.
Yeah, and would sell on the benefits. But we look today, and I mean, there's still many things that we get sold that are probably not good for us as well today. And so it still does happen. So I think, while I think we get bamboozled less, I think because we can research a little bit more if we want to. And if we do get bamboozled, I think we can react faster in de-bamboozling ourselves. I don't know if that's a word, but
we'll just make it one right now.
We'll make it right now. De-bamboozled. I am de-bamboozled. So, yeah, I think so. I think the more, and to me, I think that's also a really good sales tactic, is to create a super educated client.
Exactly. I don't know. I think it was Seth Godin who actually said this. He was like, it's a lot easier to sell someone who actually wants to buy from you. And that in and of itself is exactly what, it's a powerful statement, right? Like when you educate the buyer on like, okay, well, here is how this can help you. Well, then they start wanting to hear from you. And usually what I say is, okay, well, by the time they go on a sales call with you, they've already said yes at least once.
Mm-hmm.
So they're not there to be convinced. They already know that they want to buy from you. Now they're just trying to figure out what that looks like.
Yeah.
So ultimately, it's a great way of building that relationship. It's a great way of understanding and strengthening, okay, well, how do I help my potential client to come to a decision that's in their best interest?
Yeah. 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 And I think helping them come to that idea, but I also do think there's a moment where a decision has to be made.
Absolutely.
And sometimes that moment is uncomfortable for the person making that decision.
I think, yes, and I think it's uncomfortable for a lot of people who make that decision just because it, like, excitement and anxiety, the same thing, ultimately, right? Mm-hmm. But that's where we as sellers ultimately get to hold that space and actually be like, okay, well, let's unravel that, right? If you're feeling anxious about it, what's going on there? If you're feeling excited about it, okay, well, then what is happening in the middle? And I think that's a really powerful way of, like, one way of how I teach sales is exactly that, is when it gets to that conversation of making that call of saying, okay, well, do you want to sell on the call or not? Some people do, some people don't. But then the follow-up call, okay, do we schedule that? Yes, absolutely. We need to make sure that like, we need a clear yes or no, not just for our benefit, but for the client's benefit, so that neither of us live rent-free in each other's heads, ultimately. So it's not a bad thing. But then when we make that decision, we get to actually hold space, especially when we talk about things that have more of an impact personally when we're selling that, right? So when we talk about health coaching, when we talk about therapy and all of these things that are a little bit more impactful, then we get to do that. And then it, I think, becomes a lot less uncomfortable. So yes, you're right. And we have an opportunity here.
I know when I started selling like CRM systems back in 1997.
All right.
And when you'd go to the board of directors or you go to this, I mean, there's always people who always make a decision. It's never a company decision. And people always be making a decision based on the corporate benefit, their personal benefit, that sort of whatever. There still would be an emotional moment that they're going to have. And it's the same thing as, when I did real estate forever, and they would want to be buying that house, and that emotional moment of them signing that piece of paper saying, I'm going to buy this house. I mean, that was an emotional moment. And so each of those times it's emotional. Even when I'm coaching Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and we'll go back to those burpees, and you're trying to get them to do those 10 more burpees, and they're done. Like, they're spent. They're like, I can't do it. And you're like, no, you were going to do it. No, I can't do it. No, I'm not leaving here until you do those. Mm-hmm. That's a sales moment. And they're going through a hard decision to either stick with failure or get to success. And I'm not saying that not buying the house is failure, but the idea that they're going to transition from one state to another state, that takes a huge amount of energy. It's, if you call it, I think it's enthalpy is the word when you look at it from a technical standpoint. I mean, when you have a change of state in science, like from when water goes from a liquid to a gas, every degree a pound of water goes up by 1 degree. That's a BTU. But when it goes from the liquid state to the gas state, it's like 800 BTUs to do that. So the amount of energy required to change a state is so high. And I think that is very appropriate to think about when you're thinking about sales.
Absolutely. I hope you don't mind if I quickly mention this, but that's where a lot of identity work comes in when it comes with sales, because anything that's new is something that we obviously haven't had yet. Mm-hmm. And therefore our brains create a safety mechanism of like, okay, well, what happens when I don't have this, right? who am I when I don't have this? What does that mean about me? And it does this without you having to try anything at all. And this is sort of like the moment when, for instance, with you, when they signed the house and they started moving to a new state, first there's that excitement, and then their brain starts ticking. They're like, yeah, but what if I made a mistake? What if this was wrong? What if, right? Of course it does this, because their identity has never been that person. And again, to actually, like, we haven't actually started talking about this properly, but when we talk about this conundrum of like sex and sales, this is like, do you just, after you're done, do you just hit and quit? No, you still hold space for that person.
You have the cigarette at least, and then you hit.
At least have the cigarette. Come on.
At least have the cigarette.
Do you call the next day? Yeah, to make sure, like, depending on how big the sale is, right? But
right.
I think this is why these analogies really work, because the identity work is really, really big, and it's never really about the money. It's never, of course, if you ask someone in Poundland, or I don't know what the equivalent of Poundland is in the States, but if you ask someone in Poundland to suddenly...
Are we still talking about sex, or are we talking about something else when we're talking about Poundland?
I don't know. Let's see
what is Poundland? I don't even know what Poundland is.
Poundland is like this thing where everything costs a pound. A British
pound.
Okay.
Oh, Dollarama. Okay, we have Dollarama.
That's what I'm saying. Like, I don't know what the equivalent is, right? So obviously when I say money is never really the problem when it comes to a sale, obviously if you sell someone who goes to like a Dollarama, $1 million house, then yeah, money might be a difference, right? But obviously when we're talking about the audience, that is actually correct for that.
Yeah, but I would disagree, because, at Poundland, you could have... At Poundland...
I'm wondering where that question came from.
Yeah, because I'm like,
what do you mean Poundland?
I was like, what is Poundland? I mean,
I know where your head went.
We're taking... Right?
Did you peg
But when you go to Poundland, and there could be somebody who's there who has $10 million, they're just looking for some sticky notes, because that's the first thing they saw.
And what their values are, right?
Yeah, or you could have like somebody
sticky notes, in which case you wouldn't find them at Poundland.
You're what? Sorry.
So they might like the fancy sticky notes, in which case
that's true. Yeah.
So again, it depends on the audience, right? So it depends on where the audience identifies themselves with. If they,
I love the idea of identity, because one of the things that I've been really working on is the figuring out the moments where people make change, and really trying to understand what that mechanism is. Like when somebody quits using drugs, what is that moment? Like what stopped them from doing it? Or when somebody decided to actually commit to working out, or when somebody commits to a decision of something.
Yeah.
And then furthermore is when somebody sticks to that commitment.
Yeah.
And so, I looked at 3 things, and this is sort of a play off of, I don't know if you ever read Jay Papasan's book, The One Thing. It's an amazing book, and he sort of builds out this, and I wanted to flush it out a little bit more, but it's the idea that, people love going to these seminars, right? And you go to these seminars, rah, 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 everything's amazing. I'm going to walk on coals. I'm going to, do a dance. I'm going to, do all this fun stuff. And then when I get back to the office, I'm going to just totally change everything in my whole whatever. And then they get back and to the office, I'm going to totally change it tomorrow. And then tomorrow comes up. Definitely next week it's going to happen. And so I think, when we look at motivation, I think people, love motivation. I actually think right now it's actually a problem in society, because when we've got that phone and we're doom scrolling, like so many people doom scroll motivation. And so they get all this motivation dump and they feel good, but they actually haven't done anything. And so the idea is I think what's more important than motivation is discipline. And because if you get into discipline is where action starts happening. And this is where I like your idea of identity, because I think when discipline converts into your identity, that where it's like, oh yeah, you're the person who doesn't drink and everybody knows you for that. Or you're the person who always goes to the gym, or you're the person who always cleans the room, like whatever it is. Once it becomes part of your identity, the discipline has kind of done its job. But it's from the point of which you're not to the point in which you identify as, that's the hard thing. And then the last thing that feeds that is willpower. As we all know that discipline is great, that you have your systems, your models and all that other stuff. But if you don't have the willpower to continue to do it, that's when things fall apart. And I always look at willpower as fed by success, but I'm still trying to kind of put that all together. But and success comes in many different ways. But the identity thing, I think, is so critical. I think that right there is one of the most important things when you're looking at something, is that when you're making the decision, your identity's never been there before, potentially, or it's been there and it's had a bad experience. Like I pity marketing companies, because when marketing companies are making their cold calls, their 50 calls a day or whatever it is, and they're like, hey, I'm a Marcom company, I'm going to help you get leads. And it's like, yeah, we've all heard that before. And no. And so it's the idea that people have to break that identity of what it is, because that identity is saying, no, this is a very bad idea. I can't believe I'm signing up with these people. So I think that's interesting. I like that.
Identity is huge. And I always, when I work with clients, I always tell them, I'm like, look, my marketing is around sales and is around making more money. But a lot of the time, that's not actually what I'm coaching people on. A lot of the time, the identity piece is really, really big, because, so you mentioned motivation, you mentioned determination, you mentioned willpower, you mentioned discipline, right? And the problem isn't so much that people are scrolling for motivation, it's that people tell themselves that they need motivation to start something, but that's actually incorrect, right? Motivation is a byproduct of actually doing something. Motivation is never a starting point. By the time you're motivated, you would have already either mentally or physically done something that shows you that this is worth doing, right? Which brings us back to, why are we doing this? Why do I even want to do this? Why do I even care? Why do I want to make money with this, right? So the big why is the thing, which helps us understand what our identity in this whole endeavor is. Because at any one point, we're always stuck between fear and, I'm going to call it fear and faith, because it's a nice like acronym, not acronyms. They have the same letters. I don't know what it's called in English.
It's got a nice.
It's got a nice ring. Yeah. It rhymes nicely, right? Fear or faith.
Rhymish.
And ultimately, at any one point, what is the difference between believing in a future that hasn't happened yet or fearing a future that hasn't happened yet? The only difference is either you fear it or you have faith in it, right? Because at neither one point do you know, or can you with 100% accuracy predict that it is going to turn out that way. There are 100 million different possibilities that go in this. And our actions, so this is why I love studying NLP, our actions are always determined by, who do we think we are? What's our personal narrative, right? If I believe myself to be a broke person, I will act like a broke person. If I believe myself to be a rich person, I will act like a rich person. If I believe myself to be a bad salesperson, well, guess what? I'm going to validate that belief with my actions, whether I want to or not. And so then the question becomes, what do I need to do to make my fear of the potential failure less than my desire in the potential achievement of the goal? So what do we need to do to make myself, right? This is where your willpower comes in. So you say willpower comes from success. I would argue that willpower comes a little bit from faith in having something, in having a stronger belief in the desire than the fear of it fucking up.
Yeah, I can see that. So what you're saying is you have a stronger belief, a stronger connection to the outcome of success than to the outcome of failure.
Exactly. So to take your jiu-jitsu, for instance, right? At any one point, all of your students, they could break something, they could not hit their goals, right? So they could believe of like, oh, but what if I don't make it? What if I can't do these 10 burpees, right? No one's stopping them from telling you to fuck off and say like, no, I'm not doing this anymore. But there's a part of them that says, yeah, but my desire to achieve this is bigger. And so I'm going to listen to Steve.
Yeah.
And that's where willpower comes in. And then you have the discipline aspect of like, even though I physically and mentally, well, even though mentally I don't want to do it, physically I can still do 10 more. Okay, great. Yep. And now I've proven myself that I can do it, which now is evidence that actually my desire and my belief in my desire is much stronger, which means the fear can go screw itself.
Yep, exactly. And I think fear should never be looked on as a bad thing.
Never. It's a safety mechanism. It has a job. its function is to keep you safe.
But safety sucks. Like, I think the idea that if you're always playing in safe, and when I say safety, I'm not talking like go out and run in traffic. That's probably a bad idea. But the idea that if you're going to push the boundaries of where you feel safe and doing things that are uncomfortable, you're going to be in a moment of learning, and you're going to learn either that was a really bad idea, or you're going to learn that, oh my God, I'm actually safe. I'm actually good. And
again, evidence.
Yeah, evidence-based. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But the evidence only comes after the task has been done. And that's the thing. That's the hardest thing. That's why fear is a good thing.
Mm-hmm.
And embracing fear and knowing that you can't have, I love, there was this one line in a movie. It was like, courage comes after fear. And, you got to do the things that you're afraid of for the courage to show up. And because it's never going to go the opposite way. You're never going to be like, I'm so courageous, so I'm going to do that. No, then you're not doing something that is really, I'm so courageous, I'm going to go sit on the couch and eat Cheetos. That's not a really courageous thing. And, unless the couch is in like a lion's den or something, then, that's probably the stupid side of fear.
It is, yes. And I mean, ultimately, like everything that you said is absolutely true. I don't think that fear necessarily, and I like that you sort of compartmentalize it by saying, like, obviously don't run in front of a moving train. I do believe that sometimes we can generalize things a little bit too much by when we see like these inspirational quotes, it's like, fuck the fear and do it anyway. And I'm like, that's great. But when someone has literal trauma, when someone has, and there is something to be said for these things, right? Telling them to just go and do it anyway is not going to work. So you actually go and have to go back and unravel with them, where does that personal narrative come from? And again, we have an opportunity. I'm not saying that everyone has to do that, but everyone has, or rather people can now have the opportunity to choose this responsibility to unravel this for themselves, where we really can unravel this. And then like, okay, well, now I understand why my past has shaped my personal narrative. So I guess what else is possible for me? Right? And that's when it gets really exciting, because all of a sudden you take people from just seeing limitations to possibilities. And that's when they fucking fly.
Absolutely. But I absolutely agree with that. I think if people can make a win in a moment of fear, but if they can make it a small win in a small moment of fear, that sort of gives them like an anchor. And then they can use that anchor to start to build from, and they can then all of a sudden start to build an island. And now they can build a huge landscape, and now they can build buildings and stuff. But they have to start with that first little moment of a small win. And that's, I'm a huge believer in small wins.
I think you mentioned something really important here right now, is the difference between instant gratification and long-term gains.
Mm-hmm.
And you mentioned doom scrolling earlier, right? Like that's instant gratification. Instantly in the moment, I get my dopamine hit and I feel good, but it doesn't do anything for my productivity. It doesn't help me achieve my goals. It doesn't actually get me anywhere. What you're talking about is exactly important, right? It's the small wins. It's okay, well, let's gather small pieces of evidence one day at a time. And then all of a sudden, after a year, you've got half a bloody island. So important.
So actually, that's actually a really good build up, because if you look at it and think that if I'm doom scrolling, but if I don't connect my doom scrolling, my addiction to my motivation, with addressing a fear that I have, and I don't connect that to the action of addressing a fear that I have, whether big or small, and pushing through that gate of that fear, then I'm not going to come to the outside of the outcome that I might be looking for.
Exactly.
And I'm going to stay in the identity of who I am today, not in the identity of who I want to become. Because let's face it, if you want to become that, top athlete, and right now you're sitting on the couch, I mean, you're going to have to change your identity, and you got to go through fear to get there.
Exactly.
And I think
you have to understand your fear, I think is a really kind of is a good way of, yes, you have to go through fear, but I think when you understand your fear, it stops being so scary. Right? It's the monster under the bed. That's what I always say to my client. I'm like, you have to actually look under the bed to see what the monster looks like. Otherwise, you will always imagine it being this thing that's so much more powerful and stronger than you. But very
What if you have
often,
one of those flat beds that are like really low to the ground? Then what do? Like, where does the monster go?
well, for the sake of this metaphor, no one has a flatbed.
If those really high ones. My brother has this one that literally you need like a step ladder to get up to it. It's crazy.
Yeah.
It's got a lot of monsters underneath it. That's where they all hang out.
But that's the point, right? Exactly right. It's you have to understand your fear. You have to look at your fear and you actually have to understand, okay, well, but where does this come from? Because most of the time, when you haven't actually achieved anything yet, again, like if we look at how people are traditionally brought up to identify with themselves, right? All of us have been taught that other people know about us better than we do, right? Our parents, teachers, governments, right? What is healthy for us? What is good for us? What career we should choose, etc., etc., who we should marry or whatever, right? So there's so many things where we've been brought up, oh, just listen to your parents, listen to your teacher, listen to whoever it is that is currently an authority figure over your life because they know what is good for you. Like, just as an example. But then there is a difference between logic, when something makes logical sense, and when something is fulfilling, right? Just because something is logical doesn't mean it's fulfilling. So if I take my own example, it wasn't logical for me to move country at the tender age of 19 in the space of 3 months when I've suddenly decided that. It was not logical, but it was the most fulfilling thing I could have done. So then we could argue, was it right to listen to everyone else, or was it right that I was actually changing my personal narrative and started trusting myself and went for the fear and did it anyway in that case, right? Because my desire to not have my parents on my back and have to study something that puts me in debt for the rest of my life that I didn't even know whether I wanted to do, because quite frankly, our brains aren't developed until the age of 25 anyway. So why do we get 19-year-olds to make life-altering decisions? Like, it doesn't compute with me, if I'm very honest. Right? But again, just to sort of underline the point you've just made.
Well, I totally agree with that, and I think, well, you caught me at the 19-year-old making a decision, and I agree 100%. I think anybody, I mean, there's medical procedures that people are, considering at under the age of 19, and it's like, you don't even know who you are yet. I mean, I didn't even know who I was until I was probably like 30. And I probably still don't even know who I am. I mean, I'm just,
it's a lifelong process.
You're always reinventing yourself. And yeah, I think the idea that people should be making those decisions, it just doesn't make a whole bunch of sense. But I think they do have to commit to some path. But
the path could be self-discovery, right? If we're just talking about
exactly. I think that's a good path. I think the path of self-discovery and saying that you're on a mission to learn who you are, and you're learning who you are through a series of testing yourself in different environments and learning different things. I think is a noble task. I think that makes a lot of sense.
Not just noble, but take that for a moment. Imagine if everyone had that opportunity, right? I think Gary Vee talks about it a lot, and I couldn't agree with it more. He was just like, your 20s are for fucking around and trying shit. Like, fail. Go and try shit. If it doesn't work, try the next thing. Imagine if everyone grew up with that narrative, like, it's okay for you to try stuff, it's okay for you to not like stuff. If you find something, go and do it. If you like, just try. We won't judge you. You're not a bad person. You're not a failure. Imagine that personal narrative was strengthened in your 20s. Imagine what would happen in your 30s when you then start picking something, you start committing.
Yeah.
Right? And then when we go back to identity again, and when we go back to sales again, or even anything else, relationships, right? All of a sudden, we have people whose personal narrative is like, okay, well, I'm going to have that conversation because it's okay for me to fuck it up. I'm going to try this thing because it's okay for me to fuck it up, because that doesn't make me a bad person or a failure, because I can do better next time.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think as long as it's not, again, if I spent those times and I walk away with like a face tattoo that maybe I regret, those sort of things. I mean, I saw this thing with Mike Tyson talking about his face tattoo, and it was pretty comical. But, I mean, there's certain decisions that you might make. Like if I decide to check out heroin or something, maybe that could be a bad thing. But if it's always looking in the direction of up and not high, but up, and I think that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, I mean, you can take anything to an extreme, right? Should you be trying heroin and face tattoos? I mean, again, for some people, face tattoos is the right decision, right? Like, who am I to judge that? It's not my face, and it's not my life, but it's not my personal narrative that I value personally, right? But
well,
again,
that's right.
So
I think tattoos are pretty on vogue right now, so I don't think there's a problem with it.
Right. So again, like, you can take anything to an extreme and be like, yeah, but maybe like you can, like, what did my dad used to say when I grew up? So we grew up in like the rural area of Germany. So we used to go like mushroom picking and whatever. And obviously I was drawn to the toadstools, the red ones, because they're colorful, and there's like a 7-year-old, and he was just like, well, you can try every food once, he said to me. And so there are instances where you can't try again, but I'm saying when we don't take it to the extreme is what I'm saying.
As a non-professional on the mushroom industry, what do the red ones mean?
The toadstools, like, we were told that you die when you eat them as a kid.
Okay.
But we also, like, there were loads of things. So we were taught about rabies and all of these things, and that we need to wash the blueberries, and because we can die from rabies as well if we eat unwashed blueberries. And because I'm from the north of Germany, there were still sometimes bomb fragments, so we had to be like careful in the woods, because if you step on something that looks metallic, you could die.
Yeah, we don't get that in Canada.
Yeah. so that it's just something that I grew up with.
We've got rattlesnakes. I mean,
there you go, right? So you probably have been taught to be careful of those.
Yeah, exactly.
Maybe don't step on a rattlesnake. You might only just do that once if you're by yourself.
Yeah, it's I've run into them a couple times, and yeah, it's a pretty interesting moment. Yeah. Well, so I want to kind of close off on the idea of what's one thing that we kind of want to leave the audience think about when they think about sales, when they think about really being successful. Because I think in the sales arena, I think you've shown a different way of doing things than a lot of people talk about, and I think that's extremely important to have that perspective. What's one thing we could leave them to kind of your big bang? What's our big bang moment right now?
There's so many big bang moments. Let me see if I can filter one out. I think the identity piece is probably one of the biggest things. When you understand what your personal narrative is, right? Because awareness obviously precedes pretty much anything. If you are stuck and you can't break your own glass ceiling, whatever that glass ceiling is, whether that's income, whether that's relationship, whether that's anything, but for the sake of sales, let's talk about income, right? There is, like, think about the idea that there's always someone who's a lot less capable and skilled than you, who makes a lot more money than you. So what's the personal narrative that is holding you back? What do you believe is true about your own situation? And then think about, how is that currently benefiting you? How is that currently keeping you safe? And when you start looking at that, you start, like, your eyes start to open, and you're like, oh, I'm keeping myself safe because even though it's uncomfortable, it's familiar.
Yeah, there's so the difference between safety and familiarity, and being able to really identify that and know that familiarity actually isn't safe. It is just comfortable.
Well, it is safe to some extent, right? Because you're still alive through the whole process of that familiarity, but you can have better and still become and be more comfortable.
And more comfortable. Yeah, I like that. Familiarity versus safe. That is a good one. Sweet. Well, Adina, it's been an amazing conversation with you. And every single time I've spoken with you, it's been an amazing conversation.
Aww,
and I definitely say for people to go to adinakroll.com to check out and find the secret nuggets, the Easter eggs on your website. And I think that's super cool. And definitely a pleasure having you on the show.
Oh, it's been a pleasure being here. Thank you so much.
And guys, this is the money. This is the mindset. This is the mentoring podcast. We'll see you on the next one.